Everyone, Dr. Stillman back again with Jim Laird. Today we are going to be talking about everything really you need to know about light. So red and infrared light, visible light, ultraviolet light, how we use it to get people better and help them achieve greater health and performance. Jim, where do you start with people with light?
The morning light prepares your skin for the afternoon light, the stress of vitamin, make your vitamin D. And the evening light basically is the healing part of the spectrum.
Yep.
I basically just explained to them that, being inside all day, you don't get the full spectrum of lights, and that the sun's like a Wi-Fi router, and it basically tells your body what hormones to produce, what time of day it is.
That's right.
And I start with that, and most of them never thought of it that way.
Yeah.
I talk about the darker your skin, the more sun you need. The lighter your skin, the less sun you can get. The less sun you need. And
that's right. Yeah.
Basically where I start.
Yeah. And so I always unpack it with explaining to them really what light is. And so the only light that reaches us from space comes from the infrared on the low energy side of the spectrum up to the ultraviolet. The sun produces higher intensity rays that are very damaging, but they're blocked by the ozone and by the atmosphere in general. The microwave and radio wave radiation that hits Earth doesn't get through the atmosphere either. So no living organism is used to being bombarded with this. And what's interesting about light is that every organism on Earth has figured out a way to either live with or utilize everything that comes to Earth, from infrared up to ultraviolet. Some of them hide from it, like deep in the ocean, but then they have to make their own, right? And none of them use radio or microwave radiation for anything, which is a huge clue to the fact that radio and microwave radiations are not good for life. But when it comes to, understanding light in our environment, the sun's the number one source, and everything else you're really playing with fire. That's one reason why people can see such improvements in their health when they start to fix their light environment. And as you mentioned, right, that sun rising in the morning is the trigger for wakefulness. It controls and modulates a lot of hormones and neurotransmitters affecting people's mood, their energy levels, many other different factors in their health and wellness. And then as it gets more and more intense during the day, the ultraviolet light comes in and it starts to come to Earth and create vitamin D in people's skin. And then later on in the day, it disappears again. And like you said, exactly like you said, the red and infrared light are where we start with healing, because they have this powerful effect on our mitochondria and our metabolism in general to help produce things like melatonin and really tune up the engine of metabolism. Where do you start people with? And I mean, really, you alluded to it, right? You get people to go outside to get the natural light in their eye. And that's really important for people to understand. They don't appreciate that glasses block and modulate the light that comes into their eyes. And so these lenses are blocking blue light. Your sunglasses block somewhere between 75 and 90% of the incident light in your environment. So what I'll tell patients is, what's the difference between working in a dim building and going outside and having sunglasses on? Well, you'll notice that the disease we call seasonal affective disorder, which is basically getting depressed, blue, mopey, and tired in the winter, is really a disease of light deficiency, and you treat it with additional blue and green light. So the first thing we want to do is get people out in the morning so they're getting the full spectrum of the sun that is most healing to them. And then what else do you tell people about, red and infrared light for training and performance?
Well, it depends on who I'm talking to and how long they've been with me. Most people, you got to kind of slowly integrate this stuff, or they're going to run away scared. They're just going to, it's so counterintuitive to what most of them haven't even thought about it.
Yeah, I agree.
So I just start with the spiel, go out in the morning. If you're driving to work, crack your window, get outside 3 times a day, walk after every meal. That's pretty much what I tell people to start with. Yeah. And then I start talking about, you need to get your lights off at night. And depending on how serious they are, and, if they're willing to, I usually get them to, either get some red light night lights so they don't have to turn, or if they're all in, I usually get them to get EMR tech red light, so they can have it on in the background. And, I'll tell them, hey, do 10, 15 minutes of that in the morning, but it's always better to do, sunlight's way better. But I'll tell them that I have, my red light on is in the background during the day, and I'll have my door open. on my patio, get natural light. But at night, I never, ever, rarely turn the overhead lights on.
Right.
But getting people
let's talk for a minute about that effect of the sun, because this is something that's really counterintuitive for people that we have to talk about, which is that we have never established how much sunlight is too much, by which I mean the more sun you get, the less likely you are to die.
Right.
No study has ever demonstrated, to my knowledge anyway, and I've looked very intensely for this, that getting more sun leads you to die sooner, which is not the same as, right, the meme that gets out there, which is avoid the sun to avoid skin cancer. The vast majority of skin cancers are cut off superficially before they become invasive and dangerous. The vast majority of them, like basal cell and squamous cell, are not dangerous really unless they become very advanced. And so really people are trading the benefits of the sun, which reduces their risk of death, for reducing their photoaging, because the sun will cause you to age. But what I explain to patients is, look, you have a choice. Maximize your chances of living old enough to look like a wrinkled paper bag, or maximize your chances of dying young with pretty skin. Pick one.
Well, I've noticed, like, I'm almost 50, and I've actually noticed that I think part of it's probably because of my diet too, but I get an obscene amount of sun in the morning, like literally 4 to 5 hours of morning sun.
Yep.
Okay. I think the problem is the reason skin ages people is because they only go out in the afternoon, right?
Or the midday sun where it's really intense.
Right. They only go out at like 2 o'clock. Like most of the people here, they don't come out of their apartment until like 10 o'clock. And then by then, they're not getting, they're getting some of it still, but I'm up at 5:30 and I've got my tan through clothing on. So I'm running around naked outside from 5:30 in the morning till about 10 o'clock.
You got to explain what tan through clothing is. I think they'll blow by some people.
Yeah, I have them on shorts on now, but I've got this is a regular shirt, but I've got tan through. So
it's clothing that's made out of a mesh that allows the light to penetrate, but not in such a way that you appear to be naked.
Correct. So I basically wear that in the mornings. I wear it when I walk the dog. When I'm out in the evenings, I have, I have these things so I can get light. Especially if my digestion has gotten so like. When I first got colitis, I went completely gluten-free, and it helped, obviously. But I've noticed since I've taken my circadian rhythm seriously, not that I go out of my way to eat gluten, because it's just like, there's so much, like, I'd rather eat white rice or potatoes or things like that. But I can actually can have a beer, like if I want to, which I'm not a big beer guy, I'm more of a wine guy, but I've had a beer, and before I would literally have symptoms. I'd like get sick. But since I've taken my light seriously, particularly the morning and the evening light, I don't have the digestive issues that I used to have. But the skin part of it, I think, is that most Americans or most, Westerners, they don't go outside in the evening. They don't go outside in the morning. They only go outside. They only go to the beach at 2 o'clock on a weekend, and they bake for, 2 or 3 hours with a bunch of sunscreen on. And they blame it on the sun. But I think for me, I'm far from a model, but for almost 50, my skin, looks pretty decent.
Yeah, and so the photoaging effects of light are primarily due to the higher energies, green, blue, and particularly UV. The UV is very powerful on this. And so that UV light, because it's out more in the middle of the day, and if you want to know what your UV index is right now, just Google UV index my town. I do this all the time with patients because I'm trying to guide them into the right sun exposure habits for them. You'll see what the UV index is where you are, and then you can understand how you tolerate UV light so that you don't get sunburn, because you don't want to get a sunburn. But if you're going out and you're spending an hour or two outside in the day, early in the morning, later in the afternoon, when the UV light's not there or is present in a less high intensity, you're not aging your skin. You're really powerfully improving your health and your longevity based on everything we know about the science of light. And like you've mentioned before, just to put a really fine point on this, getting that red and infrared light, because that's what's more abundant in the morning and evening light, it helps to mitigate any damage that you sustain from the blue and ultraviolet light in the middle of the day. Which is why, going outside in the middle of the day and getting this big shock to your system, because you may be going from a an office that's very dim, we're talking invisible light's measured lux, and a dim office might be 10 lux, 15 lux, very low. You might go outside, it might be 150,000 lux. We're talking about orders of magnitude difference. And so no wonder people are getting sick. And then that's another thing you brought up.
You've had your skin covered up, you know, 99% of the time. And then all of a sudden you're going to expose it to like this, crazy high energy light. I mean, I use the D-Minder app a lot. That's a really good
another
app.
great thing for people to use.
I might only spend, I've been to Mexico, I've been close to the equator and spent tons of time outside. And because I spend so much time out in the mornings, I don't burn. And if I feel that I'm getting too much, I just go in the shade. I mean, it's, pretty much common sense, right? But I might go out after we're done shooting this at 1 or 2 o'clock, and I might sit out for 15, 20 minutes, and I might swim a little bit, and then I come inside, I'll go out and walk. But I'm not baking for 3 or 4 hours in the UV, right? Most of my time is spent in the mornings and the evenings out in the sun, right?
Yeah.
And I'm just getting enough UV to make my vitamin D,
And this is why when you look at the studies of skin cancer in people who are working outside, like electrical linemen, they don't have an increased risk of many types of skin cancer. Now, the caveat to that, and this is one of the things that really confuses the epidemiologists, and they don't publish it and talk about it the way that they should, is that the kind of work you're doing outside can affect your risks of skin cancer independently. So people who live in or work in high magnetic fields, that would be guys working on high tension power lines who are in magnetic fields that are hundreds of times, sometimes the strength of the Earth's native magnetic field, which is what you're really optimized to. Right. Those guys have higher risks of many different types of diseases. And I think some of them have higher risks of skin cancer. But when you look at the literature on working outside without sunscreen, from my perspective, the key is get as much sun as you can without ever burning. Yes. And then when you need to use sunscreen or you need to cover up in order to avoid burning, the sunscreen that I recommend is zinc oxide. And that's non-nano zinc oxide, because that won't get absorbed into your body and then distributed around it. And because we will see people with zinc overload sometimes, particularly that ends up driving down their copper and creating a lot of issues. A lot of these chemical-based sunscreens, they have been found in certain studies to have increased the risk of skin cancer, which is one of the things the sunscreen industry really doesn't want people looking at or thinking about, because it upsets the apple cart that is their living.
Well, and then people also, when they put sunscreen on, or they put sunglasses on, you're telling your brain it's an evening or nighttime, so it's not going to produce the things it needs to protect the skin.
Right.
And if you've got this, I've been wearing this 50 proof, I can stay out here much longer than I normally would because I'm protected, right? What are your thoughts on omega-6s,
Great
question. Please pronounce that for me. Linoleic acid,
yeah.
And effect on skin and sun.
Yeah, and so there's a lot of literature out there and a lot of people saying, okay, you got to eat this and you got to eat that in order to avoid skin cancer or avoid sunburn. The reality is that all mammalian cell membranes are comprised of 4 really categories of fats: your omega-3s, your omega-6s, your monounsaturated fatty acids, and your saturated fatty acids. We know that overloading the membranes with any one or other fat can lead to metabolic dysfunction. I've seen people with every kind of combination I could conceive of. And what you got to understand too is that the fats that you're consuming, they carry with them and they come with other nutrients, right? So for example, people who eat a lot of red meat get a lot of saturated fat from that red meat, but they also get a lot of zinc. Now, all of these chemicals, nutrients, really, they all affect cellular metabolism. People don't realize that 50% of the fats in their skin are actually omega-6s normally. Now, the quality here matters because not only do you see imbalances in fatty acid membranes creating issues, but one omega-6 over here is not the same as another omega-6 over here. If this omega-6 was, obtained from GMO, pesticide-laden, ultra-refined, heat process. I mean, the process for refining seed oils is insane. And then on top of that,
the lubricant, industrial lubricant. That's what it was designed for.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And they rebranded rapeseed oil. I don't know how it got that name. Canola oil, canola, Canada, oil, canola oil. And now it's a cooking oil. Very easy to produce, very cheap, very profitable for the country of Canada, grows very well in the Western Canadian provinces, but has no use as a culinary oil. And so the process by which it's manufactured matters. And then on top of that, right, what people will do is they'll put the wrong oil in their pan and they'll smoke it and they'll burn it. And then they'll eat that with their steak or their salmon or whatever. And you're really you're making a bad thing worse, which is why now I tell people I only want them using very stable saturated fats like lard, ghee, tallow, any kind of refined, or rather not refined, but rendered animal fat or dairy fat, or I want them using olive oil. And I don't want them to do anything, and I mean anything, with anything that's loaded with omega-6s or omega-3s, other than blending them and soaking them and sprouting them. And that's what I do. I make my own nut milks. I don't trust the ones I buy at the grocery store. I'm very careful to store my nuts and seeds, like vacuum sealed with oxygen absorbers and silica gel packs. And I'm getting back to skin cancer, right? I don't have solid answers for people as to what's going to minimize their risks of, because everybody's different, right? But I don't want people eating you should expect to have worse skin quality and more skin aging if you eat poorly. You should expect to be able to tolerate less sun if you eat poorly. And this is actually the real take home from this, is that you got to remember that the nutrients in nature that you need in higher light environments grow, or the foods that have them are abundant in high light environments. You look at, for example, folate. Folate is degraded and destroyed by by UV light. And you'll find that foods high in folate are legumes, that's beans, and green leafy vegetables. Where do we find these things? Very bright environments. You're not going to be able to have a salad with black beans in Alaska in the winter unless you've flown them in from a warmer place, or you've preserved them from the summer, right? Which we can do. Which we can do. But that means that, my rule for my patients is if it grows where you are right now, it's got nutrients you need. Look at all the bright colors in plants. They help us to absorb photonic energy. And if that's why people who high dose on carrots or beta carotene, they'll turn orange. Those pigments in their skin actually do protect them from this oxidation process. And so I want people eating a really broad range of different foods, lots of colorful foods for that reason, because it contains the nutrients they need to mitigate all that energy coming in from the sun. And then they got to be eating high quality fats, because unless you're eating high quality fats, your lipid membranes, your cell membranes are already going to be impaired. And then that UV light or blue light will hit them and it will make them even worse. And so this compounds the issue of having a diet that's rich in fatty acids that are really toxic.
The reason I brought up the omega-6 thing is I don't think people realize just how much seed oils there are in everything.
That's exactly right.
Like we are getting bombarded with massive amounts of soy oil,
right?
Soybean oil, all these oils that are just not part of our diet. From if you did eat those things in the past, they were soaked. They weren't made into an oil. You made oil out of animal fats. So you look at packaged foods, every one of them has some sort of oil in it, right? Even if you buy nuts at the store, they're cooked in some sort of, seed oil or canola oil or something, so I've heard a lot of people talk about, eating excessive amounts of omega-6, and that's why a lot of people are struggling today. So, that's why we want to get back to eating real food, is we want to get away from, a lot of these things that are in the food that just are not necessarily ideal for us.
I was just typing because I wanted to bring up the nutrition facts comparing a tablespoon of soy oil and a tablespoon or an ounce of walnuts. And I want to bring this up for a minute to just show people. This app's called Chronometer. It's what I use to track diets with people. if you look at and this is comparing, like I said, 1 tablespoon of a soybean oil and 1 ounce of English walnuts. 1 tablespoon of soy oil, and that can disappear in a pan. I mean, for all you know, the Chinese food that you're eating from a conventional Chinese restaurant's got 5-6 tablespoons of soy oil loaded into your General Tso's fried chicken, right? So look at something like the omega-6 in 1 tablespoon of soy oil, it's 7 grams. Now, that's not the same quality as fresh English walnuts, which is the proper name for the walnuts we buy at the grocery store. Now, an ounce of that contains 10.8 grams of omega-6s. So it's more than the soy. But an ounce of nuts is really quite a lot. And the people will run into problems if they're consuming, 1 handful of nuts after the other. These are a very dense, very powerful food. And the omega-3s are important here too, because walnuts have a lot of those as well. But the point is simply that, with cooking oils and modern cooking oils and processed foods, the oil's being added as a flavor enhancer. It really satisfies people's hunger. It tastes good. It makes the food taste good. Even if it's a rancid, disgusting, ultra-processed, toxin-laden oil, it makes things taste good so people eat more of it. This compounds the problem of photoaging. And so the sun is being blamed for a lot of diseases that are linked to improper light exposure as well as improper diet.
Absolutely. Well, and I think the main thing is it's cheap. That's usually how these things work, is they find something that they have an abundance of, and then they try and find a way to put it in stuff, right? So
right, exactly.
Reduce cost.
Yeah, and so back to the light story, right? We don't want to overly vilify blue and green light, by the way. We mentioned that the sun's very important. It's not just about getting outside in the sun. There's a reason that I have my office in my house in the brightest room during the day with south-facing windows. I get as much natural light as possible through these windows as any other set of windows in the house. And one of the other things I'll tell people is, and I wish I'd done this when I set this office up, because this desk is very, very big, but I wish I'd oriented the desk towards the window, because you'll find also that that there's hundreds of lux of light coming in through those windows. But when I look that way, it's really only 50 or 60 or 70 lux of light. So you're getting more light just by facing that way. And it also, this is a tip for those of you who want to preserve your eyesight. One of the reasons why people have such poor eyesight today is they're doing so much reading and looking at near objects. If you have a window in your office and you're constantly looking out into the distance, you're relaxing those eye muscles, gives them time to recharge, leads to less eye strain, fewer headaches, better long-term vision. And so that's one of the other things I tell people. I want them to do their work and spend their time during the day in the sunniest room in the house, oriented towards the source of the light in that room.
Or on their patio.
And this is where living an outdoor life can be really powerful. People need to wake up to the fact that building these McMansions on these tiny little lots, they're like, oh, I want to maximize my floor space. Stop. You want to maximize your light exposure. And so having an outdoor living space, a space where you can get up in the morning and maybe start a gas range and put a pot of water on it to make some coffee, is a really powerful hack that's going to not only improve your life in general, but actually add years to your life in all likelihood, because you're getting that time outside. And then you can combine that with other things that we tell people to do, like earthing, which is, we'll talk about more later. But, to help really get their time, the most out of their time outside, particularly in those early morning hours that are so critical.
Or things like hammocks, like just being out in a hammock. And you talk about, if you think about in the past, or if you look at like Latin culture, they tend to do their work early in the morning and later on in the evening. And then during the day, they kind of chill, right? So,
or they have a siesta.
Siesta. I mean, in a hunter-gatherer type situation, when it's like, hot at 2:00 in the afternoon, 1:00, you're not going to be chasing deer around or, hunting or doing any kind of hard labor. You're going to do that when it's cooler in the early morning and in the evening.
Yep.
And, the heat of the day, you're going to seek shade. You're going to, so once again, it's like trying to, adjust our modern world to a more, our biology is still wired for that world of thousands, 100, even 150, 200 years ago.
Yeah.
We've just gotten so far away from it that it's foreign to most people to even go outside in the morning. I mean, I can't remember the statistics. I know I saw a study where maximum security prisoners got more time outside than school children do. I've seen that.
That's trash.
It is. I mean, so, we basically become zoo animals. There's actually, if you go on my LinkedIn, there's an article called Animal Madness, what happens to an animal when you put it in the zoo, and they end up with depression, anxiety, obsessive compulsive behavior. They go back and forth, and
let alone a cage, right?
Yeah. I mean, so even if they're in a natural environment, they try to make the environment as natural as possible. And these animals are used to roaming for, hundreds of miles.
Right.
We created this world where we're essentially a human zoo animal. So you want to become the least zoo animal-ish as possible.
For people living and operating in high latitudes, that means places that are dark in the winter. You're probably wondering, how does all this apply to me? I can only get abundant sun exposure in June and July and August, and then I'm covered up again in September. And my answer to you guys is, and our most up-to-date product recommendations will be posted elsewhere. They'll be very accessible to you. We really want you to understand which products to use. My answer to these folks is some combination of sauna therapy, red infrared light therapy, and ultraviolet lamps. So my setup is the Spurdy vitamin D lamp right now. I get at least 5 minutes of that a day when I'm not getting 30 minutes to an hour of sun exposure in my either shorts or swim trunks here in Florida. So it's very warm, so I can do that most of the year. And then I will also use a red infrared light panel called the Inferno from EMR Tech. And I'll get 5, 10, 15 minutes of that, fully disrobed. So I'm getting all of it everywhere, because you want your nether regions to be getting this light. It's very healing and therapeutic to them. Some of the most disabling modern medical problems, problems with your bowels, problems with constipation, problems with pelvic pain, problems with erectile dysfunction. All of this happens right in organs that never see the light of day. And you've got to be mindful of the fact that light can heal, treat a lot of these issues. It stands to reason you should get doses of light on these areas on a regular basis. So even during the summer, I'll actually use the Spurdy and the Inferno for that purpose, to keep optimal vitamin D levels with the UVB from the Spurdy vitamin D lamp, and then get my red infrared light dose from the Inferno. Sauna, the dose I always tailor to the patient, but I like to start at 20 minutes 3 times weekly. And the sauna setup I can talk for hours about, but I don't have a sauna right now because I live in such a hot place. I like the sauna space right now for sauna lights, because it's got really nice frequencies coming out of it, and it has been well controlled for EMF emissions. And I recommend sauna therapy on a regular basis to everyone when it is cold where you are. If it's cold enough for you to be covered up, you need to be hitting the sauna, barring some kind of medical contraindication, and there's very, very few, because of how powerfully sauna helps us to maintain our longevity. And a big piece of that people need to realize is that infrared light is perceived by your body as heat. So sauna therapy is really infrared light therapy in a way. It's combined with a high temperature that you're exposed to. So it heats up your body, causes you to sweat, causes you to get rid of toxins. It also causes you to get rid of minerals. So a word to the wise, those of you with bad mineral levels, you've perhaps been over-exercising, overtraining, you've been drinking mineral depleted water, you guys may get worse when you sauna. And that's why I like to tailor this to mineral levels, and also make sure that they're getting the right water and mineral balance into the body so that they don't deplete those minerals even more. Jim, anything to add to those light therapy tips for people in cold places?
Yeah, I mean, that's what the Nordic countries generally tend to do, right? They have sauna.
Oh, yeah, that's why it's a tradition. I mean, it's sweat lodge for the Native Americans and sauna for the Finns, Swedes, Norwegians, and Russians.
Yeah, and they eat more fatty fish in the winter, So right. That's, that helps with your vitamin D levels. I mean, if you look at traditional cultures in the past, I mean, they figured this stuff out a long time ago. And that they figured out how to live, with and in their environment, right?
Yeah.
They ate and used what was in their environment, and then they adapted accordingly. And
and that's a really important.
Created our own environment,
right,
which we're not adapted to.
And that's a really important point you made with the fish in native cultures in cold places. No culture in a cold place exists without an abundance of fish consumption, because there's no way to keep your vitamin D level normal in the winter without supplemental UVB lighting, without eating fish 2, even 3 times a day. Now, that you can do it also with full fat dairy, so there's a couple different ways to do this. But with the number of people who I treat who can't tolerate dairy for some reason, you can do it with ghee, which arguably is not going to set people off who've got a dairy allergy. But the point is just that if you're not getting UVB light, you've got to get your vitamin D somewhere else, from a supplement or a fish or dairy. And traditionally, cultures have done this with fish and dairy products.
And then also, if your vitamin D levels are good going into the winter, you've got a little bit of reserve there.
That's right.
I'm working with a couple right now that has a child that has some autoimmune issues and is doing very, very well. And she was actually talking about relocating to Florida, her own idea. And I was like, that's great. And she's like, well, we got to get a bunch of things in order. And she was, worried about stressing about getting down there as soon as possible. And I was like, look, if you've got to get some ducks in a row, for the last couple winters, he hasn't spent last couple summers, he wasn't outside at all. I was like, he's going to have his vitamin D levels topped up going into the winter, and we can do some interventions to get you through the winter. So, if you're in a place where you can't move south, you're in, like where I was in Lexington, I would do the same things Dr. Stillman did, but I would always make sure I would go into the winter with my vitamin D levels topped off, because, part of our natural ebb and flow is you're going to have low levels, high levels, as the seasons change, right?
And so the vitamin D levels peak in human blood September and October, because that's usually when there's still, and that's in, a country like Germany or the northern United States. They peak in September or October, and then they drop. And that's one reason why cold and flu season doesn't correspond to the winter solstice. It's actually January, February when we see the most deaths. That's when the vitamin D levels really drop, because there's none coming in. And then they're at their lowest in February and March, but then the light starts to come back. People start to wake up. They're better off. The weak have actually died during the winter, right? And you get this survivor effect. And then the levels start to climb again when the UV light returns to the environment, anywhere from, the spring equinox to or mid-May. And then levels start to build back up again.
Yeah, and back then, you would be doing less activity, and you'd be sleeping more in the winter.
Right.
So we've created this artificial funness where we can have the same temperature all year round and all this good stuff, and it just
right.
Obviously we don't want to go back to, if you want to, go for it, but living like a hunter-gatherer would be pretty difficult in our modern society. But picking the things that we can do to get more in touch with nature is going to make most people's health improve dramatically.
Right. Yeah. And then, so let's talk a little bit about red and infrared light therapy for, I'll mention briefly that UV light has a lot of performance enhancing benefits, but we'll also get people using the red and infrared light therapy panels on aches, pains, muscles they need to recover. How do you tend to integrate that into clients' work in the gym with you?
Well, I had a lot of clients get red lights. And so I would just tell them to do, 10, 15 minutes. I know very high level athletes are using the red light tanning beds now. The Russians studied this way back in the 50s and the 60s.
Yep.
Of course, with a caveat, they also use performance enhancing drugs.
Yep.
With the light therapy.
Right.
But I find that most of the people that I deal with are, because they don't have all the basics down, just by getting them outside and all that just makes, and getting their sleep in order, their circadian rhythm in order, that really takes them way beyond where they were. And very few people need to get like very specific, most people are all worried about like, how many minutes of this, how many minutes of that? Well, have you gone outside 3 times today?
Right. Yeah. Have you done the basics?
Yeah. Have you done and most people don't, but you could get into more of the specifics of like what frequencies and how often, but the number one thing is
I don't find that I have to either.
Yeah. The number one thing is like, is your circadian rhythm in order? Are you sleeping? Like that's the biggie. Like,
so on that note,
yeah,
let's talk about blocking blue light after dark.
Sure.
Yeah. And so, I mean, we talked about this a little bit in the sleep talk, but getting the most out of light during the day is one thing, but avoiding blue and green light after dark is the other key. And that's where things like blue blockers or using the night mode or the dark mode on an app or a website or your tablets or your phones becomes very important. And then I use low blue light and low Kelvin light bulbs in my house. I'll use incandescent lighting for the most part because I like how warm it is.
Yeah.
I also believe that infrared light coming out of those bulbs is going to have a therapeutic effect on the back of the eye, the retina, when it comes in.
Sure.
And so I use incandescent bulbs that are around 2000, 2200 Kelvin max, or I use low blue light LEDs or CFLs in, say, a bathroom where, for example, the incandescents may be too high of a wattage, they may be too hot, or I just want a little bit less or different frequency and color of light.
A different ambiance.
Different ambiance, exactly. Yeah, right. But I'm really serious about keeping that blue light after dark to a minimum because it's so easy to do once you're used to it. And you see such a profound benefit to your sleep, like you said, circadian rhythms, rest, recovery, and long-term, we're looking to minimize diseases of the eye and the skin, which are fast becoming more and more and more common and are very crippling in our society today.
Well, and this becomes really complicated, and I had to deal with this with a lot of my clients in Lexington. Is like, my client I was working with, usually a lady, would like see massive benefits to making some of these changes, and she started changing the bulbs, and then the husband would get pissed off and be changing the bulbs back. Like, what are you doing? This is crazy. So it gets complicated because, as a single dude, as us as single dudes, we pretty much, control our kingdom. It gets very complicated when, and if you are married, you have a spouse, you have to do the best you can to take care of yourself. That's where blocking glasses and things like that come in. And then slowly educating your spouse on this stuff to get them on board. So you don't end up causing, so it's a really, really sticky thing when you've got one person bought in and another one. Like if I do date anybody, if they come over, it's like they don't flip the lights on. And if they don't like that I've got red lights on in my house, it's like, bye. That's just me. So you have to decide what's best for you. Obviously you're in a marriage, you have kids and family. It gets really complicated. And, you just have to do the best you can to take care of yourself and then hopefully lead by example. And that's mainly what I tell people, that they have one spouse that's really into their health and the other isn't. I was just like, lead by example, take care of yourself, and hopefully they'll start out going, wow, look at her, look at how much healthier she is, look at how much better she feels. Well, that person starts asking questions. So I don't know how much you deal with that in your practice, but unfortunately we have a lot of that where we've got one member of the family is kind of the black sheep. I mean,
I'm lucky in that when the recommendation comes from the doctor, family members listen more.
Yeah, that's true. Well, and the thing is too, like when you develop rapport with people, it would help that, a lot of the couples would know me personally, and then I would get to talk to that person as well. But, it is kind of an issue when you've got one person who's flipping the lights off at night and the other person wants to watch TV before bed, so it's, if you're in that situation, I empathize for you. And, it's one of those things where you just kind of have to figure out what's best for you.
Right. And with time and with,
Well, that's the cool thing about working with that couple. They're both totally on board, and they realize that they have to set a good example for their kid,
right,
for his health, but not only for his health, but their health as well. Right.
Absolutely.
So, and there's going to be a great divide here, and it's already happening, where we've got people that are going to be in touch with nature, and they're going to flirt with technology, but they're going to be grounded in nature, and they're going to be a completely different human than where these people are going, where you're living in the metaverse and you've got, glasses, these headsets on, and you're living in this virtual reality, right? That's coming a lot faster than you think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Unfortunately.
So I think that about wraps it up. Any last thoughts?
Well, like I always say, keep it simple. Start with 3 times a day outside. Get the lights off at night. Do the best you can. Red light, night lights in the bathrooms. Put a red light on in the background. You get incandescents if you need some sort of lights. Obviously, if you don't see well, like you talked about with your mom, you don't want her busting a hip because she can't see where she's going. So use some common sense.
I didn't mention that today, but I do mention that sometimes when we talk. So if you've got an elderly family member who you're trying to fix their light environment, don't leave them in a dim environment, because if they're 70s, 80s, or if they're a frail 60, 50-year-old, if you leave them in a dark environment, they have poor eyesight, which is of course very common amongst the elderly. You're putting them at risk for a fall. So make sure it's bright enough that they can navigate. Make sure they've got lights that are low in blue light near the bed, in the bathroom, so that they're not at risk for falling.
Yeah, but that's the big thing, is get out in the morning and get the lights off at night. Like, absolutely, that is the foundation of everything. It's not going to fix everything, but it's the foundation of everything. I mean, there's some people in this space, it's like, if your light environment's great, you can do whatever you want. Well, it's not that simple.
Not that simple.
But get that straight, because that's going to make everything above it easier. It's going to make, if your circadian rhythm's in order, or your light environment's in order, you're not going to have the cravings, for alcohol, for sweets and sugars and all these things. You're not going to have a lot of those issues that a lot of people today are struggling with because their circadian rhythm is broken.
Absolutely, yeah. That's a nice segue into the next topic we're going to talk about, which is diet. So thanks everyone for watching. We'll see you in the next episode.